rich. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care if you get the raise, land the promotion, build the business, hit the number you've been chasing for the last 5 years. The feeling you're expecting to arrive when you finally get there, it's not coming. And the fact that nobody is talking about this honestly is costing people their entire lives. So today, we're going to fix that. We're going to dig into the actual psychological and financial mechanics behind why feeling wealthy is almost impossible for most people, and more importantly, what you can actually do about it so you stop spending decades running towards something that keeps moving every single time you get close. Let me start with a story. A guy named James grows up in a working-class neighborhood. Money is tight. His parents argue about bills. There are weeks where the fridge is pretty empty, and the stress in the house is so thick you can almost touch it. James tells himself that one day, when he makes enough money, everything is going to feel different. He studies hard, works harder, and by his mid-30s, he's pulling in $200,000 a year. He has a nice house, a newer car, vacations every year. By any objective measure, James is wealthy. But here's the thing. James doesn't feel wealthy. He feels like he's one bad month away from losing it all. He feels behind. He looks at people around him who seem to have more, and he feels a quiet, gnawing sense of inadequacy that he can't shake no matter what he accomplishes. James's story isn't unique. It's actually the default human experience with money, and there are very specific reasons why. The first reason is something called hedonic adaptation, and it is one of the most brutal forces working against your sense of financial well-being. Here's how it works. Your brain has a remarkable ability to normalize almost anything. When you get something new, whether that's a higher salary, a better apartment, a luxury item you saved for, there's an initial spike of pleasure. It's real. But then, over time, that new thing becomes the new normal. Your brain recalibrates. The thing that was supposed to make you feel rich just becomes the baseline. And now you need more to generate that same feeling again. This isn't a character flaw, it's biology. Humans evolved to always be scanning for the next threat, the next resource, the next opportunity. Settling into contentment for too long would have been dangerous for our ancestors. The brain that kept pushing, kept wanting, kept striving, that was the brain that survived. But that same wiring is absolutely terrible for your financial happiness in the modern world because it means the finish line is always moving. The raise feels amazing for about 3 months, and then it just becomes your salary. The new car is exciting for a few weeks, and then it's just transportation. The house you dreamed about becomes the house you're already thinking about upgrading. The pleasure fades, the desire resets, and the cycle starts again. Now layer on top of hedonic adaptation something equally powerful, which is social comparison. This is not just keeping up with the Joneses, that old cliche that people laugh off. This is a deep, hardwired cognitive process that your brain is running constantly, whether you're aware of it or not. You don't measure your wealth in absolute terms. You measure it in relative terms. You measure it against the people you see every day, the people you follow online, the people you grew up with, the people in your industry. And here's the devastating part. The wealthier you become, the wealthier your reference group tends to become. When you're making $50,000 a year, you're comparing yourself to people making $60,000. When you're making $200,000, you're comparing yourself to people making $500,000. When you're making millions, you're surrounded by people making tens of millions. And suddenly you feel behind again. The goalpost doesn't just move, it accelerates. And social media has turned this into something almost catastrophic for an entire generation because now your comparison pool isn't just your neighborhood or your office, it's the entire curated highlight reel of the wealthiest, most successful, most visually impressive version of everyone on the planet served directly to your brain every single morning before you've even gotten out of bed. Studies have shown repeatedly that beyond a certain point, your absolute level of income has very little correlation with your day-to-day emotional well-being. What matters much more is your income relative to the people around you. A person making $75,000 in a neighborhood where everyone else makes $50,000 will report feeling better off than a person making $150,000 in a neighborhood where everyone makes $300,000. We are not wired to feel the absolute number. We feel the gap. We feel the distance. And in a world designed to constantly show you people who are ahead of you, that gap is always going to feel larger than it actually is. This brings me to the third reason, which is financial trauma and the scarcity mindset. This one goes deep. For a lot of people, the way they grew up with money, or without it, leaves psychological marks that don't disappear just because the bank account grows. If you grew up in a household where money was scarce, where financial stress was constant, where your parents lived paycheck to paycheck, or where you watched your family struggle, your nervous system learned something very early on. It learned that money is dangerous, that it can disappear, that you can never really trust it, that security is an illusion, and that lesson gets embedded into your identity at a level that a higher salary simply cannot reach. People with this kind of financial background often experience something called wealthy but broke syndrome, where they have genuinely significant money in their accounts, but they still feel the same anxiety, the same scarcity, the same sense of impending financial doom that they felt as children. The numbers change, but the feeling doesn't, because the feeling was never actually about the numbers. It was about safety. It was about control. It was about whether the world is a place where you can trust that you'll be okay. And those beliefs don't update just because your net worth does. Here's something that makes this even more complicated. Our culture has a really specific and often completely unrealistic definition of what being rich looks like. We've been sold a version of wealth that includes the mansion, the sports car, the private jet, the wardrobe that costs more than most people make in a year, and the lifestyle that gets photographed from every angle and posted for maximum envy. And because most people, even quite wealthy people by any reasonable standard, don't live that way, they don't identify as rich. They see rich as something that belongs to someone else, someone further up the ladder, someone with the jet and the yacht and the island property. Wealth gets defined as whatever is just out of reach, and that definition shifts upward every time you gain ground. So even when you've objectively built something significant, something that would have seemed impossible to your younger self, the cultural script tells you that you're not quite there yet. You're not really wealthy. Real wealth is somewhere above you. And then there's the spending trap that ambushes people on their way up. As income grows, lifestyle inflation tends to follow, and it follows quietly, almost invisibly. The slightly nicer restaurant becomes the standard restaurant. The business class upgrade becomes the only acceptable way to fly. The school that you're willing to consider for your kids gets more expensive. The neighborhood you're comfortable living in gradually shifts upward. None of these individual decisions feel extravagant in the moment. They feel like natural upgrades, reasonable rewards for all the hard work. But collectively, they consume the financial distance you were creating, and suddenly you're earning significantly more than you used to, but you have about the same amount of margin, the same financial cushion, the same distance between your income and your expenses. So even though you're making more, you don't feel more secure because you're not more secure. The boat got bigger, but so did the anchor. Now, I want to talk about something that most personal finance conversations skip entirely, and that's the identity piece. Who you believe you are has a massive impact on how you experience your own financial life. Most people who grow up without money don't just lack wealth. They develop an identity around not being wealthy, and identity is incredibly sticky. When money starts to arrive, there's often an unconscious sabotage that happens, or a refusal to integrate the new reality, because accepting that you're now financially okay means updating a story you've been telling yourself for a long time. It means becoming someone different. And as uncomfortable as the old story was, it was familiar. It was known. The brain resists the update not because wealth is bad, but because change, even positive change, requires a rewiring that most people were never taught how to do. So they keep the old emotional architecture even when the financial circumstances have shifted dramatically. They keep the anxiety. They keep the scarcity mentality. They keep the sense of being behind because that's who they've always been. And changing it requires looking inward in a way that's genuinely hard. Let's also talk about the difference between wealth and cash flow, because there's a reason why a lot of people with high incomes feel perpetually broke, while some people with moderate incomes feel genuinely financially calm. It's not about the number on the paycheck. It's about the relationship between what comes in and what goes out. And more importantly, what's working for you while you're not working. When almost all of your income depends on you showing up and performing every single day, and when your expenses have grown to consume most of that income, you're on a treadmill. You might be running faster than ever, but you're not building distance from the edge. The people who actually start to feel a sense of financial peace, not necessarily the people who have the most stuff, but the ones who feel genuinely okay, are almost always the ones who have created some separation between their labor and their income. Some money working in the background, some cushion that doesn't depend on this particular month being perfect. That's not about being rich. That's about having built a buffer between your present decisions and your future security. And that buffer is what actually generates the feeling of safety that people think wealth itself will bring. Start to close this gap. How do you stop chasing a feeling that's designed to keep retreating? Because this isn't just a philosophical problem. It's a practical one with practical answers. The first thing you have to do is understand the game you're actually playing. If you don't consciously name hedonic adaptation and social comparison as forces actively working against your sense of well-being, they will run invisibly in the background, and you will never have a chance against them. Awareness isn't everything, but it's the beginning of everything. When you notice yourself thinking that you'll feel financially okay once you hit the next number, you have to be able to flag that thought and recognize it for what it is. It's a trick your brain is playing on you. The number never delivers the feeling. The feeling has to be cultivated separately, intentionally, and independently of what the account balance says today. The second thing is to define enough. This sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but it is genuinely one of the most radical things you can do in a culture built on never enough. What is the actual life that would make you feel okay? Not the aspirational life, not the life you'd have if every investment paid off perfectly. The real life. What does your day look like? Where do you live? How do you spend your time? What are the actual financial requirements of that life? When you do this exercise honestly, most people discover that their real enough number is significantly lower than the number they've been unconsciously chasing. And that gap between what they're running toward and what they actually need is where a significant amount of unnecessary suffering lives. Third, you have to actively manage your comparison inputs. You cannot eliminate social comparison because it's hardwired, but you can change the pool you're comparing to. Curate your social media ruthlessly. Consider what conversations you're having and with whom. Think about whether the media you consume is consistently showing you people who have more than you. Because if it is, your baseline is constantly being pulled upward in ways that make your real life feel smaller than it is. Burying your head in the sand, it's about being intentional with the information you let shape your sense of where you stand. Fourth, start building the buffer. Whatever your income is right now, the most important financial move you can make isn't maximizing your lifestyle. It's creating separation between your income and your expenses, between your current month and your future security. Saving and investing aggressively isn't just a wealth-building strategy, it's a psychological one. The gap between what you earn and what you spend is where financial calm lives. Even if that gap is modest right now, the act of building it consistently, of watching it grow, creates a felt sense of security that no lifestyle upgrade ever will. This is counterintuitive in a consumption-obsessed culture, but it is consistently what separates the people who feel financially okay from the people who don't. Fifth, do the inner work. This one is uncomfortable, but but it's probably the most important. If you grew up with financial stress, if money was a source of fear or conflict or uncertainty in your early life,